In this chapter, we are going to talk about how to create a database and how to populate the database with given items. But of course, first of all, we have to talk about the given data types because we have to define the given types whenever we create a given variable. So first of all, let's talk about character data. Characters can be stored as fixed length or variable length strings. As far as the fixed length strings are concerned, it always consumes the same number of bytes, and this is the so-called char. As far as variable length strings or varchars are concerned, the number of bytes can change. So this is the crucial difference between chars and varchars. Chars are fixed length strings, varchars on the other hand are variable length strings. So when we create a char, then the maximum length for char is 255 bytes. For example, when we want to store country codes with 3 letters, then we have to create a char with value 3, and it is going to be quite efficient because we know for certain that every single country will be represented with 3 characters. So this is why we have to use a fixed length string. For example, HUN stands for Hungary, USA stands for the United States of America, GER stands for Germany, and so on. So in these cases, when we know the length of the strings we have to store, then it is advisable to use chars. And of course, we can use varchars. The maximum length for varchar is 64 kilobytes. For example, we can store names with varchar because the length of the names will differ. Of course, we don't know for certain that what's going to be the length of a given name. I mean that how many characters are there in a given name. Of course, there are names with just a few characters. There are very long names. So in these cases, we have to use variable length strings. For example, varchar 20 means that we can store strings up to 20 bytes. But of course, if the given string is just 4 bytes, then we will use 4 bytes exclusively. So that's the difference between fixed length and variable length strings. Okay, what if we would like to store a huge text? So if we want to store a huge text, then using varchar is not the best option possible because this is what we have been talking about, that we can store up to 64 kilobytes. But what if we would like to store text that exceeds 64 kilobytes? In this case, we have several options. We can use tiny text, text, medium text, and long text. And this is the case when dealing with WordPress related websites. So for example, these texts and these images are stored in a MySQL database. So of course, in this case, I have very small text, as you can see. So these are the texts WordPress has to store in a MySQL database. But of course, it may happen that for a blog article, we have to store tens of thousands of words in a given database. And of course, this is when we can use the text type. So as far as tiny text is concerned, the maximum number of bytes is equals to 255. The text is very similar to a varchar because we can store up to 64 kilobytes of data. The medium text is approximately 60 million bytes of data, and the long text can store up to approximately 4 billion bytes of data. Okay, so of course, again, it depends what we want to store. If we want to store just a very small text, then of course, maybe tiny text is the best option. If we have a huge blog article with tens of thousands of words, then of course, we have to use medium text or even long text. Okay, what about numerical data? There are several different numerical data types depending what range we are looking for. Of course, we can use signed and we can use unsigned values. Unsigned values when we know for certain that the values are greater than or equals to 0. So as you can see, for example, tinyInt can store up to 256 possible values. Of course, if we are after negative values as well, then the range will be -127 up to 127. If we know for certain that we don't have to store negative values, for example, if we want to store the age parameters of given employees, then of course we know for certain that the age parameter is greater than 0. In this case, we can use an unsigned tiny integer because of course we know for certain that the age parameter of a given person is within the range 0 up to 255. Okay, then we have the small integer, again signed and unsigned, so we can store values up to 65,535. If we want to store larger values, then we have the medium int, then we have the int or the integer, and then we have the big integer. Of course, if we want to store the wealth, so the net worth of a given person, then of course we have to use big integer, because if we consider Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, of course they have hundreds of billions of dollars, so we have no other option but to use big integer in order to represent their wealth in dollars. Okay, so this is why it is crucial to know about the numerical data types, because it depends on the concrete application. If we want to store the age parameter, then of course we don't have to create big integer, because the tiny integer will be fine as well. If we want to store the salary, then we have to make sure that we can represent every single salary for sure. So in these cases, the integer or the big integer will be the best option possible. Okay, what about floating point numbers? So what if we would like to store values such as 2.71828 and so on? In these cases, we can use float, we can use double, or we can use decimal. The float or the floating point number is a single precision number represented on 4 bytes, while double is a double precision number represented on 8 bytes. Of course, we have two parameters p and s. The P stands for precision. It is the total number of allowable digits both to the left and to the right of the decimal point. What about the scale or the size? It is the number of allowable digits to the right of the decimal point. So here we have the decimal point and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 digits on the right side of the decimal point in this case, and we have a single digit on the left side of the decimal point in this case. So we can define what kind of values we would like to store with float, double, or decimal. And of course, it is again absolutely crucial. For example, we have created a simulation for the solar system. So we have used differential equations and we have used the so-called Runge-Kutta approach in order to solve these differential equations. And we have been using floating point numbers. And we came to the conclusion that some things went terribly wrong because the simulation didn't work. And then we came to the conclusion that instead of floating point numbers, we have to use double precision numbers in order to represent the given positions and the given velocity parameters, and we ended up with the valid solution. So again, it is absolutely crucial to know what data type to use, whether it is a floating point number, a double, or a decimal. We are going to talk about several examples and it is going to be clear. And finally, we have to consider date and time. So there are several types as well. We have the date, as you can see, year, month, and the day itself. Then we have the date time, so we have the year, month, day, we have the hour, we have the minutes, and we have the seconds. We have a timestamp variable, then of course we can define the year exclusively, and we have the so-called time with which we can define the time exclusively, hours, minutes, and seconds, as you can see. So again, it is absolutely crucial to know what to use, because sometimes we are after the date format and sometimes we are after a time format and so on. So that's all about the most crucial data types. In the coming lectures, we are going to talk about how to create database tables and how to define the data types for the given variables. Thanks for watching.